I'd echo what Ryan said at the end there, that it's natural and appropriate for religious convictions and religious worldviews to affect the way one sees the state and affect the way one sees society, and to affect one's decisions on policy or where they want to take social action. I know, and it's also helpful to tease those out sometimes and figure out why is this person believing or acting in a certain way. For instance, Martin Luther King Jr., who was, and a bunch of other people, but who in the civil rights era was very influential in changing not only society but also getting laws passed. He was in the room when LBJ signed the the Civil Rights Act. He was informed by his faith, and as were many others in that movement, and that was very positive and very very helpful for that movement. And in fact, the linchpin to it, some historians would argue. And I would like to, I guess I'll comment just because it's fun on the under God. Will that be taken out of the pledge? I think there was just a recent court case that came in favor of keeping some ceremonial act like this. Do you want to know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it was in New Hampshire.
Okay.
It was a family in New Hampshire that didn't want their children to have to say the pledge, and a teacher said that they had to. It went to Court of Appeals, went to...
And did the Supreme Court just refuse to take the case, or did the Supreme Court...
The Supreme Court took the case.
And came out in favor of the pledge?
Right.
Okay. So right. I think that will probably be...
because there's the option to not say it. You're not obligated to say it in school. There's also a law that says that you can have a minute of morning prayer every morning in every classroom that you don't have to participate in, but it's just whether we actually practice it or not. So, there it is.
A quick comment on the under God issue.
Please.
I think in terms of the under God issue, this is one of the times when, as long as you're not compelled to say the Pledge of Allegiance, I don't think anyone is arguing we should, that while the Pledge of Allegiance is an important symbol, I think we have more important political and policy questions to deal with than what kids say in the morning. Under God is, people say the Pledge of Allegiance in rote, as long as you're not forcing them to say it. Whether or not under God is in there is such a moot and silly thing that we sometimes, but I think, honestly, in my personal opinion, it's a waste. I don't believe in God, but as long as I don't have to say the Pledge of Allegiance, who cares?
Ibrahim.
Yeah, so I think that the United States is, I want to believe that it's going to be more religious, in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time, just me being a religious person. But I really honestly believe that it's going to be a much more secular place. A couple of years ago, I was studying abroad in Seville, Spain, and one of the weekends I went up to Amsterdam, and there was a bridge over the Amstel River, and I was walking, and there was this really nice looking church. I don't know how many years old it was, probably like a few hundred years old. And there was a guy, I don't know if he was selling marijuana. Well, marijuana is legal over there. So anyway, so I don't know what he was selling, but I talked to him, and I was like, how many people actually go there? How religious is, Holland, Netherlands? And he's like, it's pretty much the priest in there and the janitor. And and I was like, what about Sundays? He's like, yeah, there's really not many people who go. So, I don't know if that's foreshadow, or if it's not. I don't know. Will we get marijuana laws passed where it's not going to be illegal? But point is that although I want to believe that we're going to be a religious society moving forward, I think the hints and what we're seeing, it's going to be a more secular country.
The churches, those big churches, are used actually for PhD defenses at the university. Not lying.
So this ends the sort of formal question part, so this is the informal question part, in which I think questions from you will be directed to our audience. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Woo-hoo. So please, anyone, if you don't have a question, I have a few.
My question is directed at Ibrahim. Ibrahim seemed to be the only person who supported a parent actually having the ability to essentially take his or her child's life by refusing that person medical treatment. And my question directly to Ibrahim is, invariably the United States of America has protections for essentially everyone who's under someone else's tutelage to that degree. Like if an older person in a nursing home were to die due to some type of illness, that nurse or the doctors or the administrators in that hospital would be responsible either in a civil lawsuit or even criminally if they're proven to be negligent. Why do you feel that a parent is above and essentially out of the realm of actually being prosecuted by the full extent of the law by not doing their duty that they were given through state laws, federal laws, and human law?
Well, I haven't read human law, but number one, it's a loaded question. Number two, I don't know how invariable it is. And number three, I think you're making an assumption. The assumption that I think you're making that's inherent in that question is that, as you said, the parent is taking the life of the child. Now, I don't know how true that is. For example, with Jenny McCarthy, she saw that vaccines were having adverse effects on children. Now that could be, I don't know, like chickenpox or measles vaccines, whatever it was. The point is that there were children who died after these vaccines were administered. And she said that I'd rather my child, possibly get this disease, which wouldn't kill him, and, strengthen his immune system. Maybe he'll suffer for a couple days, whatever, rather than risk it. Take the vaccination.
I'm sorry to interject, but I'm talking about why is that parent above and essentially outside the realm of Western convention, where if someone is under someone else's tutelage, if someone is responsible for someone else's welfare, if someone dies while they're under someone else's welfare, that person can be prosecuted, is very often prosecuted. Why is that parent outside that realm? Just answer that question.
I
don't think he ever claimed that they were outside of legal action.
Well,
I think his original point, and I think his original, I remember what he said, which was it was with regard to honoring one's parents. I think let me just say I don't think he had ever said that. If we never asked him directly, if a child died, do you think that somebody should be investigated? We can ask him that question. But I'm quite certain we know the answer is that, of course, he would want someone to investigate that crime.
Right, I agree. And I think, again, you're making assumptions when you're asking these questions. You're making the assumption, the question itself, as was phrased, was, excuse me 1 second. Under U.S. law, parents or legally responsible caretakers can go to prison for refusing medical treatment for children on religious grounds. Should parents have the right to refuse treatment based on religious belief, or should medical treatment be compulsory no matter what? Okay, you're making the connection that the medical treatment, if received, would definitely prevent the loss of life. Now, if you can prove that, if this was administered, that person's life would not have been lost, then yes, the parent might be or should be held accountable. But some will say that that's a very strong connection, and some will say it's tenuous. But that's an onus on you to prove. And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I just want to kind of add on to that to maybe make the distinction more clear. So you brought up the case of vaccines. Now there's some questionable research about the effects of vaccines and whether or not people ought to take those. So for those of you that are interested in this topic, I highly encourage you to look into criticisms of the research that's being cited, because it's a big field of research right now and it's very important. But whether or not someone takes a vaccine for religious purposes is entirely different from whether or not a child receives medical treatment, such as removing the appendix when they have appendicitis. Because if someone's appendix bursts, they will likely die. And so in that circumstance, doctors are in the position to tell the parents, yes, your child will, for any reasonable expectation, your child will die without receiving medical treatment. So, but he's right though, the question wasn't phrased with that example in mind. The question was more broad. And so in the case of vaccines, it's an entirely different situation. And the same is true of antibiotics. Like I know in my answer, I said that I felt that parents had the right to deny their children the use of antibiotics on scrapes and cuts, for example, which is a very minor example. But when it comes to removing a child's appendix in a life or death situation, we're really on the other end of the spectrum here, and the answer is sometimes very different. So it's difficult. We have a very general question with two very polar opposite examples and cases that could happen.